was just painful and stressful, and like you don't really want to be spending your time doing that as a freelancer. Like you want to be finding work and doing the work. So yeah, I think that became quite clear that there's definitely like a gap in the market for a product which does everything in one place.
Hey, welcome to Homescreen. I'm Will Jones, Head of Design here at 11FS. Tunde is away this week, so I'll be hosting in his place. And Homescreen, for those who haven't seen it before, is a show from the 11FS Pulse product team, all about product and design, where we talk about the stuff that all the smart people are building right now and try and learn a few of their secrets and show you what those products actually look and feel like. To find out more, go to pulse.11fs.com or at 11FSPulse on Twitter. And on today's show, we're focusing on banking and accounting for the freelance market, and specifically how you design to keep the accounting processes simple and hassle-free for your users. With me today, I have Joelle Snaith, a product designer at Coconut. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. So first up, for those that don't know, what's Coconut?
So Coconut is a tool that helps self-employed people manage their business finances. So what that means is you get a business current account, or you can connect your external accounts using open banking, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about in a little while. We have a tax tool that automatically calculates how much tax you owe over the course of the tax year. And we have an invoicing tool where you can create and send and manage your invoices through the app. We'll also notify you when your clients have paid you, and we'll match that invoice to that payment. And we've also got tools like bookkeeping tools such as expense categorisation, receipt capture, the ability to add notes to your transactions so you can keep all your records in one place. And then finally, we have an accountant portal. So if you have an accountant, you can invite your accountant to the portal and they'll get access to all your business records in real time.
That's a lot. I mean, as someone that used to freelance, it sounds very, very useful. Presumably there are quite a few competitors out there. Who do you think are your main rivals, and what, probably of the long feature list above, what do you feel really makes Coconut stand out?
So I think what is really exciting about open banking is like we actually see ourselves complementary to like the other smart banks out there like Monzo and Styling, and also complementary to the high street banks like Barclays and Lloyds, because what open banking now means is that you can actually use our product without needing to necessarily have a Coconut account. Well, that's where we're aiming at in future at least. And you can use all our tax tools and our bookkeeping tools no matter who you bank with. So I think in terms of our competitors, where we see ourselves kind of innovating is in the bookkeeping space. There's a lot of products out there like QuickBooks and Xero who haven't really innovated like in the last 10 years. The experience of using them is quite clunky, and actually they're really more focused on like large businesses and not so much on the small individual kind of freelancer. And that's also why we've decided and made a very conscious choice that we won't be integrating with products like that, but we actually want to replace those products. So I think that's where the bookkeeping space is more where we see ourselves like competing in.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I know a few banks are definitely scared that the bookkeeping space is moving into banking, and there's almost this middle ground war for the two between. But it sounds like you guys are sort of racing ahead a bit. For you personally, just talk through a little bit for people viewing what you do at Coconut and kind of your sort of career trajectory to that point.
So I'm the product designer, so that means I take care of all the output across the iOS and Android app, our accountant portal, the website, the marketing website, any design output required, be it keynotes or emails, and like banners and marketing materials. So yeah, that's kind of what I do, which is pretty much all the design responsibilities. I started in design back in 2003. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. So
Cool.
I started during the era of like Flash animation and table-based kind of HTML,
Me too.
which was a really exciting time to be involved in the internet, although it wasn't like accessible at all. But I spent like quite a number of years working at digital agencies where we would be servicing kind of the digital needs of above-the-line agencies, so rolling out like microsites for selling like a whiskey, which to be honest, after some time I found quite soul-destroying. And yeah, really monotonous, and just really wanted to start working with actual people and work on a product that actually people find useful on their day-to-day. And so I decided to go freelance. Worked as a freelancer in Cape Town for some time, and then moved to London about 7 years ago, and I freelanced for about 6 or 7 years in London, working at various agencies doing product. Started working at a startup full-time in 2016 in education. They ran into financial difficulties, so I had to, I was basically let go, and I said, I'll never work at a startup ever again, and I'm never working full-time ever again. And then I freelanced at Coconut for 3 months, and they offered me a full-time role, and because I loved the team and I really believed in the product, I worked at a startup full-time and did exactly the thing I said I would do. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've worked across a few different places. What's the design scene like in Cape Town?
Well, you know, it was challenging, especially being involved in digital, because like we're about 4 or 5 years behind in terms of access to internet, cheap internet, for example. Like I didn't even really have I had a BlackBerry when I moved to London in 2012.
Okay.
I didn't even have an iPhone or a smartphone. And yeah, it's quite closed in some ways and can be a little bit clicky. Cape Town is like, I find, quite inward looking. I tend to think the world revolves around them. It's small town syndrome. And yeah, I just found it really challenging because a lot of my friends were working overseas and pushing kind of what they were doing a lot further than where we were, and we were really actually restrained by, we had a lot of constraints. But actually looking back now, I think some of the constraints that I found frustrating, I'd actually enjoy those challenges now. Like not having good access to internet for me is actually now a really interesting problem. But I think earlier on in my career, I just wanted to make cool stuff and like do cool things.
We all did.
And so I was frustrated by that constraint. So yeah, it's interesting how I've kind of come full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, if you were given constraints like bad internet, you're like, oh, brilliant.
That's a great problem to solve. Yeah, exactly.
So you talked a bit around sort of you at Coconut in terms of the wider sort of product and design team or teams at Coconut. Is that fairly small?
Well, I'm the only designer. So I am the design team. And then the product team, yes, we are very small. I mean, there's only 18, I think, people in Coconut as a whole. Okay. And so it's on the product team, it's myself. We've got 2 Android engineers, 2 iOS engineers. That whole team are remote except for 1 in-house iOS engineer. And then we've got 3 back-end engineers and 2 product managers. So we're all working often on multiple features at the same time. Yeah. So it's quite a lot of context switching in that regard.
I bet. And I bet having sort of a small team as well, it means you can work a bit more nimbly and more collaboratively, even if it is hectic. Yes,
exactly. And like you really have quite a lot of say into kind of the direction of the product. Everyone's voice gets heard. It's a very flat, structure. So that's really cool in that way, yeah.
I like that. And moving on to sort of Coconut and the design language that you have. If that was something you were involved in really creating, how did you decide that was right for your specific demographic or the material that you were sort of doing and the interactions?
So the design language is very much like informed by principles of authenticity and reliability and transparency. We're really trying to build a product that is easy to use and that makes like quite complex problems seem quite simple, and that extends to the way we talk about things. So we really work hard on our tone of voice and like how we explain things in an easy to understand way, and really try and avoid at all costs using jargon. I think in the accountancy world, it's really they're very guilty of always using complicated words and making everything sound 10 times more complicated, and we try really hard not to do that. The brand was actually developed by someone else, an amazing designer called JB, who's joining us next year in January, so I'm really excited about that. So he'll be supporting a bit more on the brand side and developing the brand a bit more, because I do feel like the brand could do with a little bit more personality now that we've kind of laid the groundwork and got a product that's working well.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of an interesting approach to brand that works quite well for startups, especially ones that are growing quite rapidly. You need something there initially to resonate with your audience, but then as your feature set rolls out and you see how people react to it, it's about then being able to iterate on the brand just as much as you would have in the product.
Exactly.
So I think you talked a bit already around sort of some of the features you offer, and obviously they're aimed at what I guess in the wider sense is quite a niche market in a way. Do you guys find that there weren't enough products angled towards the specific set of people when Coconut first launched?
Well, so our founders, Sam and Adam, are themselves accountants, and they went freelance a couple of years ago and actually found that even though they were accountants and they knew so much more about accountancy and bookkeeping, they were finding it really challenging to manage their own books and do their tax returns. And so they just thought to themselves, well, if we're finding it hard, how does the normal layperson find it? And actually, a lot of the products out there, like the cloud accounting products, are aimed at bigger businesses. And my experience as well was that I would use like Google, spreadsheets to track my invoicing and who's paid me, or I'd create my actual invoice in Microsoft Word, and then I'd be using like 2 or 3 bank accounts, and like if you're using a number of different tools to manage, and then I was still paying my accountant £120 a month, and having to every month put together my expenses and like go through my bank account, and like it was just painful and stressful, and like you don't really want to be spending your time doing that as a freelancer. Like you want to be finding work and doing the work. So I think that became quite clear that there's definitely like a gap in the market for a product which does everything in one place.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me, especially what you said around you're paying someone £120 to essentially do what? File some things.
Exactly. And then, when they email you back, they're speaking in a way that you're still actually more confused by the end of the email what they were saying.
That's it. Well, it sounds like there's a definite need for Coconut. Should we dive in and have a look at some of the journeys, and then we'll talk about them? First up, we'll have a look at categorisation. So what are we looking at here? Give us a little...
Okay, cool. So when you go to the transaction detail, there's a button which allows you to change the category, and that brings up a long list of categories grouped by like sort of parent groupings. So we've grouped it... we change the order of the groupings depending if it's a payment in or if it's a payment out. So in this instance, it is an expense. So the allowable business expenses group is at the very top. Then we've got disallowable business expenses. We've got another grouping for other, another one for income. And next to each subheading is actually this little question mark icon, which you can tap, and then it'll just tell you like how do these categories and these groupings actually feed into your tax calculation. And the hope is that by adding those little descriptions that we've got there that we spend quite some time on, and including this guidance, that little information icon that you can tap on and actually read a little bit more about that category and like why you can claim it for tax or why you can't claim it for tax, or explaining with some of the more complex ones like travel, it's a bit of a grey area, so explaining kind of when you're allowed to claim for travel. And the hope is that this helps people like also learn a little bit about bookkeeping themselves. So rather than us just telling them how to do it, they're actually getting better at it themselves and developing like an understanding and like getting empowered, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I mean, it looks very detailed in terms of what people can get from this. I guess it's almost categorisation. You've got all these bits within it of allowable, disallowable subcategories. I guess what considerations have to be made when designing something like this, when you know that coming into it on the surface there is this huge impenetrable list of things for people? What was your starting place essentially?
I think the starting place was thinking about the groupings. So at least at a very high level, you can tell almost at a glance, okay, these are all expense categories that I can claim. These are not. These are income categories. The list is quite long, and it needs to be quite long because in order for us to get your tax calculation right, and in order to get your VAT suggestions right, if you're VAT registered, the categories need to be quite precise.
Yeah.
So doing things like having like the little sticky header, so when you scroll the long list, you sort of know what group you're in, and having that little bit of guidance and those like simplified little detail, like little descriptions that give you an indication of like typically what kind of transaction you would apply that category to, kind of forms part of the work that we did around that screen, really.
And obviously this relies on a lot of icons for visual cues.
Mm-hmm.
I love a good icon set. What was sort of the logic behind the design language for this? Or was it more around sort of consistency?
Yeah, so the icons are actually a little bit of a pain point for me personally, because they were those are basically material design icons taken from the material design system.
Okay.
It was MVP, and like we need to get the feature out, so that was a quick way to go about it. So now every time we add a new category, it like doesn't really make sense to design a bespoke icon because it wouldn't fit in with the rest of the set. So we tend to add the icons and categories quite quickly. We think about like what makes sense as a representative image. But I think one of the things I'm looking forward to next year is putting aside some time to redesign the whole category set and add a bit of personality, and just do it on a grid and come up with like a consistent language. Because if you look closely, you'll notice like the rounded borders are not all the same radius, and sort of all kinds of things where you have to just learn to be like really pragmatic about it, because it's working for our customers, but there is a little bit of lack of polish in those. So for me, it's a little bit of a pain point, actually.
So is that something you see? You mentioned that the brand will be refined a little bit in the future. Is that something you see really cascading down from that piece of work?
I think so, yeah. I can see that being part of that work, and just, injecting kind of some of the personality into the empty states and things, because we don't have really much around that at the moment. So I see that like working a bit harder to kind of get our tone of voice across.
Yeah. And in the meantime, hope that no design freelancers nerd out too much on the corners within the
Hopefully not. I'm pretty sure someone's doing it, but yeah.
So thinking through sort of how you're visualising the way that people spend, what was the approach to that? So
we, the one area of the app that we, at the moment, are visualising spending is in the tax tab, which is at the moment kind of this round graph, and you kind of swipe between the different, how much you've spent in expenses, how much your income's been, and what your tax is. So I think initially the thinking was a graph would be a helpful way to digest that information, but actually what we've discovered is that people tend to just read the numbers, and if you're going to use a graph, it actually needs to be quite simple and really easy to understand. And I think one of the things we're going to improve on when we do our profit and loss kind of summary is going to be redesigning the tax tab and thinking about how to present all the information like in one view as well, rather than having to swipe between this component, which I think it's served, it's done well, but like I think it can be improved in the next iteration. Okay, and I guess this is very much an educational piece, and it's kind of like you were saying at the start. I think a lot of people struggle to understand this sort of thing, even if they have an accountant. There's a lot left to do. So there's a lot of emphasis on explaining categories. There's a lot of sort of extra information. Did this sort of get built out as you got a lot of user feedback to try and understand what they didn't know, or were you working from sort of information that like an accountant would provide? Or a bit of both? A bit of both, I think, because in the beginning, we didn't have the guidance in the beginning, and what we found was like people were asking what they could apply a particular category to. Are they allowed to apply like travel to kind of a place of work that they go to every day, and can they claim that? You're not allowed to. And so like the little question mark icons next to each section heading and then the information icon on each row item came a little bit from user feedback, but also from a desire from our end to kind of be as transparent and honest as we can about what you can claim, and try and educate the customers as well as much as we can. So.
Okay. And then before we move on to having a look at another journey, we had Moniz on a few weeks ago who had sort of opening hours and things in their categorisation. And I guess there's a lot of information you can get from Google Maps and other partners and sources. It's kind of, where do you draw the line for these things? How much information is useful for the user? And is there anything that you could potentially pull into Coconut that you're not?
Yeah, I think things like location data is really useful, and but I do believe that in our instance, it's probably something you sort of need when you need it. So that's why it's like been deprioritized on the hierarchy of the page, and we've focused on kind of heroing the more bookkeeping side of things on the transaction detail. In terms of like more information on the page, I'd actually need to do a bit of research and ask some of our customers like what they would find useful, because at this point in time we're not planning on adding anything. We've been focusing on like the VAT suggestions feature and improving kind of the categorization and things. So.
Yeah, and I think for a product like Coconut, where there's a lot more going on than just showing you where you've spent something, there's a balance between sort of visual overload and being useful, I guess, isn't there?
And I mean, I think it's great because you know, if you do need to follow up where a transaction happened, like you can just scroll down and then you can see it, but it's definitely a bit lower down in the hierarchy of the page of the information.
That makes sense. Let's have a look at the VAT journey on Coconut here. So talk us through a little bit what we're looking at here.
Cool. So in order for us to start like applying VAT to your transactions, you need to tell us that you're VAT registered. So you can go into your business profile, set your VAT start date, which is the day that you want us to start recording VAT from, and your VAT number, and as well as your VAT rate scheme. Again, there's little notes and guidance around what those schemes actually are, with a Learn More link to find out more if you need to. So once you've actually toggled that on, what you'll start noticing is these little red dots showing up in your transaction list, as well as you'll notice if you go into some transactions, we will have actually applied a rate already. And so what we're doing is we have taken a approach of overestimation, where we figured like it would be better to rather overestimate your VAT rather than underestimate it. You never really want to be in a position where you haven't paid enough VAT, because then you can get fines and things from HMRC. So we've got like default rates set on all the categories. The categories are what determine the VAT rates, and there's default rates set on all of those. So some categories like insurance, like we know for sure that that's always going to be VAT exempt, and we're quite comfortable applying that rate and then telling you that we've applied that rate. You can then go in and change it if you wish. There are other categories that it's not 100% clear which is the correct rate, and that's when we'll actually suggest some rates. Like this one here is 20% the correct rate. If you accept it, great. If you reject it, you get presented with these alternative rates, which are, again, it'll be the suggested rate plus one other that will be most likely correct for that particular transaction type. But again, if you don't end up selecting another rate after you've rejected it, it's okay, because behind the scenes on the back end, we're going to apply that default rate. So you'll never be in a situation where you've kind of got these lingering kind of transactions with these rates that haven't been confirmed because they have been actually applied behind the scenes. So that's kind of one way of us trying to mitigate people, not approving and rejecting the rates, but we want to encourage that.
Yeah. So I guess the person using this almost has a safety net of
exactly.
At least some VAT rate is going to be applied.
Yeah, and when you spend, when you spend on your card, like you'll get a push notification that will tell you either a specific rate's been applied or that we've suggested a rate. When you tap on that, it'll go through and you'll get prompted. And as you change the category as well, you'll notice sometimes it'll give you a the suggestion again, sometimes it'll just have applied a rate for you. So it is completely linked to the category. So it's kind of important that you're categorizing your stuff correctly as well.
Okay. I mean, that sounds, it's almost a pattern of behaviour that the user has to get into to be able to do it. Did you apply any sort of behavioural design techniques in terms of being able to understand how these nudges would get someone through to going, oh yeah, I need to do my VAT, and what they get back from that?
Well, there was quite a lot of upfront research into kind of understanding VAT and how it works in the UK and the different rates, because you get different rates for income and you get different rates for expenses. And I think quite important to this work was like building a prototype of that interaction using origami and like an interactive prototype, and testing that with a few people, and sense checking that and making sure and discovering kind of any areas that edge cases or questions that might have arisen, and that's how we kind of approached it. So was that sort of where you started, or was the design process very different from what you had done before? Obviously, because the problem space is incredibly complicated and has all these external factors around sort of regulation and compliance, and even from a legal perspective. There was a lot of reading, and Adam, our product manager and founder, he did a really great job at collating and putting together all the various documents around VAT and the complexities that you have, like for kind of purchases around the EU and things like. There's a lot of kind of complexities, and I think what we did in the beginning was we figured out a way to talk about it in a simple way. So we simplified the language first to make sure that we could talk about it in a way that we understood it, because it was like at one point I was confusing myself, and even now I need to sometimes go back and revisit some of the concepts because it's just really still quite complex. But yeah, I think it was a little bit more sort of upfront. It was a lot of learning in this particular piece of work, and really understanding how the process works.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the surface of it, thinking about how to approach it, it seems just sort of an incredibly complicated thing to approach. And like you said, I guess the tone of voice becomes super, super important.
Very
because
important.
Everyone can find this information out there. Yes, it's not contextualized, but they still can't understand it. In terms of that tone of voice that you're going for here, we spoke a bit about it at the start. Is there a big list of banned words or translations from the really business speak through to okay, now I understand it as a layman? Or
well, we probably have a list lying around somewhere, but I think we just call each other out as we're going along, and we, things like we would never use a word like accruals, or like, we just avoid jargon at all costs, and that goes right through to kind of our alerts and dialogues and kind of error messages and things. And with the VAT rates, like there's also a little note under each rate that sort of tells you typically what that rate would be applied to. So again, that's just trying to give people examples of the types of transactions you might apply a rate to, in the hope that it's educating them along the way as well. Yeah,
that makes sense. And in terms of, we saw a few of the interactions of how you can apply VAT. I think there was one where it popped it out, and then at another level as well. Do you find most users prefer one of the methods and one sort of almost a catch-all? Or
So it's a good question, and I wanted to actually dig a little bit deeper in that, but I think at a high level, just at a glance, people do seem to be interacting with it and using the suggestions feature or the alternate rates feature. But I think it's still useful to be able to go and change it if you need to, if we haven't got it right, or just put in an exact amount if you need to. But I do think the feature's working quite hard, which is great.
And do you think sort of Coconut as a product has enough sort of affordances built into it to stop people making mistakes with their VAT? Or are there, or do you have to be careful not to make too many assumptions?
Well, I think that comes a little bit back down to, that principle of overestimation and, making sure that we never put the customer in a situation where they're underpaying or underclaiming on their VAT. Equally, just trying to be transparent, so every time you've made a transaction, like we're telling you what's happening behind the scenes. But yeah, it's a fine line to walk, and like if anyone ever has any more detailed questions, they can always talk to us on chat. But for the most part, I think the way that we've structured it, it's got enough fallback that like we won't be making any assumptions that will actually harm the end goal of the customer when they do their VAT return.
That makes sense. And I think looking at it, there's a real. It does look like there's as a customer or someone that could be a freelancer using it, there is something in there that's giving me sort of feedback as I do it and telling me how to do it that is definitely missing in the relationships that you would have with most accountants and definitely with your bank. So
exactly.
Yeah,
and I mean, what's super cool is like if you have an accountant that's using our accountant portal, like they will see the same thing that you're seeing on your transaction feed. They will also see the little red dot if there's been a suggested rate, and they can then see, okay, you haven't approved or rejected that rate, so they can go in and do that for you. If you've applied it incorrectly for whatever reason, they can do that for you. So and that'll be all happening in real time. And so it'll really build this collaboration with your accountant where actually you're saving them time in the long run because it's making their life easier, and you're learning and getting better at doing your own books. So hopefully in the long run it saves everyone time and also money.
Is sort of the, I guess an offshoot from that as a benefit is that accountants will start recommending Coconut.
Yes, because like one of our goals is like we're not competing with accountants. We have a lot of accountant partners that we're working with. We actually want to make their lives easier. We're definitely not here to kind of replace an accountant.
Yeah.
So yes, they have been recommending us to their clients, and I think again with open banking, that's just going to open up a lot more opportunities, and it's going to open Coconut up to like a lot more people that'll be able to use the product. That'll be cool.
Yeah, and funny you should mention open banking. Let's segue very smoothly into the next journey. That was perfect. So I'll just bring that journey up here, and just tell us a little bit around what's happening within this one here.
So before you've connected any accounts, we have this empty state. So the way you'll be able to navigate through all your different connected accounts is through this kind of account widget where you can swipe between your different transaction feeds. If you tap the settings icon on the top right, you end up at this connect your accounts view. This is launching the TrueLayer modal. So they are they're the provider that we use that allow us to connect all these different banks to our product. So I've used my Monzo account as an example in this particular flow. And we're not live with this feature yet. We're going live in probably about a week's time, and I thought it would be interesting to share some of the challenges around data that you get from the banks via TrueLayer and some of the problems that we still need to solve. So I've logged in to Monzo now. It's redirected me to the Coconut app, and I get a list of all my accounts. And these are all my accounts and my savings pots. So obviously pots are actually just savings accounts behind the scenes.
Sure.
So you can see, and what I thought was super cool is like all my emojis came through, which is super fun. That kind of made my day. But what we want you to really be doing is connecting accounts that you use for business transactions. So we wouldn't recommend that you connect a savings account because you shouldn't really be putting business transactions on there. But if you did, you could. So here you have a little setup where you tell us, like, what do you currently use this account for? So for the purpose of this demo, I said I use my Monzo account mainly for business, which is not true, but it could be if I was a sole trader that I was using my personal account for all my business transactions. And then we say, because you've been using this account for business, we're going to automatically categorize your transactions. If you had said you use this account for personal transactions mainly, we would have categorized them all as personal. And that's because the categorization feeds directly into the tax calculation and the VAT suggestions. So we wouldn't want you to be having a whole lot of personal transactions like feeding into your tax calculation when it's not correct. So I now connected my Monzo account, and so you can see all the transactions that have come through there. And yeah, there's quite a lot of challenges around the data that we're getting from them. A lot of work to be done around how to clean it. So all those pot transactions there, those IDs, those really ugly IDs, like some of them are transactions from my accounts into pots, but a lot of them are the roundup pot transactions.
Okay, sure.
So that's why you get the 0.10p or whatever. And obviously Monzo like hides that stuff from your transaction feed, but we just get everything from them.
Yeah.
So these are things we've discovered over the last few weeks, and it's going to be a piece of work figuring out how to clean that data, how to hide it. Do we want to hide it? What do we do with it? Also, like strangely enough, a lot of the transactions, all my notes are coming through as the descriptor. So instead of a merchant name, like for example TFL, it's coming with the actual note that says travel charge for this and this date instead of TFL. So that means we don't get the logo, because we run enrichment on the transactions when we get them. So we'll run them through our merchant cleansing software that it gives us, puts the logo on, applies the category, and does the location and everything like this. But when you don't have that descriptor and it's not correct, then it's gonna affect how we categorize everything, and it's gonna affect like not getting the logo, for example. So challenging, but it'll be good to explore this problem a little bit deeper.
Yeah, would you say that's sort of a very technical challenge, or as the designer at Coconut, is that something that you would take the lead on and have a look at? I
think this would be led by engineering initially, because it has been really quite a complex challenge. Open banking is like quite flaky still. Like there's a lot of challenges around connections with the banks no longer working. For example, Barclaycard just stopped working and it hasn't worked in weeks. So if you've connected Barclaycard previously, like how do we handle that elegantly in the UI? How do we handle if we can't get all the accounts within a bank or within an institution is what we call it. So yeah, it's something that engineering will probably need to do some work on first and come back, and then we can talk about like we can design around those technical discoveries or constraints, whatever they end up being.
Sure, and I guess taking it back to sort of the benefit to the user and them using Coconut, I think it's probably evident for most people watching this, but what are the core problems that you're looking to solve for the user in using open banking?
Yeah, so what's like really exciting is that with open banking, you can now make use of all of Coconut's bookkeeping tools, no matter who you bank with. So like some of the problems that we've heard people talk about is, oh, I've opened a business account like 7 years ago. I really want to use the Coconut tools, the bookkeeping tools, but I don't really want to change banks. It's not easy to change banks, so I quite like my bank. Another problem is that like people like to use their credit cards to get points, so they'll put expenses on their credit cards for travel and accommodation often, and they want to get the points, but it's actually a business expense. Like how do we get that into Coconut? Also, sometimes you just accidentally will put an expense on your personal card because you forgot your card at home. Or in the case of sole traders, often they are using personal bank accounts for their business. A lot of the time that has happened. Limited companies, that's less so. And yeah, it's just about trying to bring everything into one place and having this kind of health check on all your finances in one area. So yeah, I think that's what's going to be really exciting is like you'll be able to use all our bookkeeping tools and our tax tools and everything, and you won't need to actually use Coconut for the account necessarily.
Sure. And I guess looking at the journey we just saw, obviously, there's a bit where you are then interacting with TrueLayer.
Yes.
I guess the question I wanted to ask is kind of twofold. How much control do you have over that experience of that flow where you're connecting? And how jarring is it for the user in the testing that you've done?
Well, the TrueLayer experience starts from after you tap add an account and brings up that modal where you've got to give your user consent, and then they redirect you to your bank login. And that experience obviously varies. The Monzo one is relatively seamless, but like some of them are obviously not. Luckily it doesn't feel too disruptive. It's presented in a modal, it sort of presents itself and then dismisses and you get redirected. So actually the flow doesn't feel too disruptive. And I think in terms of the UI, like we've been able to change a few colors and we can't really change much, but the TrueLayer UI is actually not bad at all. They've done a really good job, I think. some awkward things with like the bank logos at the very bottom being half cut off the screen and like whatever. There's things like that we won't have control over.
Sure.
But they're also working on improving it themselves, and we're talking to them and sharing some of our challenges, and they're working with us to try and improve it too. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really exciting thing in about a few months or years time.
Okay.
Yeah, open banking and Freelance, it's going to be.
And that's good to hear that, because obviously it's in their interest to work with everyone that's partnering with them to make that experience better. Yeah. Great. Just before we wrap up and say goodbye, where are you sort of currently at in the product's life cycle? You mentioned sort of some branding coming in and this feature launching.
Feels like we're still quite early. We only launched Coconut like end of January last year, and it was really only now with open banking that it feels like we're starting to build like a really robust kind of bookkeeping tool. There's so much more we want to build and add, so many more features that we want to do. So I think the next year is going to be like a really big year for us. Yeah, we're going to do a crowdfunding round at the beginning of the year as well. So it still feels like we're quite early on in the process, to be honest. Yeah, it's exciting.
It sounds exciting. Is there anything you're particularly excited about at the moment, both what's coming up for Coconut and I guess in the design industry as a whole?
So yeah, I'm really excited about like the deferring KYC, where people will be able to actually like use the Coconut app without having to sign up for a Coconut account. So that means you won't go through the whole onboarding process with the ID checks. You'll just be able to start using it and connect your bank accounts, and then so that's going to be really exciting. I think one of our most requested features has been vaults, so like taking a percentage of your income and automatically putting that into a vault. We've had to push that back quite a bit, although to focus on these other features like open banking, and that's something that people are really keen for. So I'm really excited that we're going to focus on that feature soon. And then things like profit and loss, a summary of the health check of your business really. And then on a personal level, we've been spending a lot of time pushing out features this year. It's been like really focused on feature, getting things out to the customers. I'm quite keen to take a little step back and focus a bit more on the craft, a little bit more on the interaction design, do more user testing. We've got a great community on Facebook. We get a lot of feedback from people, but where we can do better is kind of bringing people in to test products early on, or test features at least early on. So yeah, I think, and then building the brand out and having JB coming in and like really starting to create a little bit more of a personality around Coconut, I think is like going to be super cool.
It sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've got a lot to be getting on with.
I do.
So I won't keep you a huge time longer, but thank you very much for talking us through the product. No, thank you for coming. So I guess that's it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Stop by next week when Jim will be talking to Tully and how they're building a banking platform for good. If you want to see more of 11FS Pulse, head over to pulse.11fs.com, where you can also request a demo. If you've got any questions about the product or want to suggest a journey for us to include on our platform, or indeed this show, hit us up on pulse@11fs.com or find us on Twitter @11fspulse. Joelle, where can people find out more about you or Coconut?
Twitter, Joelle Snaith, Instagram, Joelle Snaith, LinkedIn, Joelle Snaith, and then joellesnaith.com. So just like hit me up and get in touch. Like I love talking to people and hearing from people. So yeah, it would be great if you got in touch. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.